Welcome back to Mythic Sky Storytime. I'm Dr. Laura Tadd, spiritually oriented psychological astrologer. This is the 7th show in my new series, Cosmic Costumes, where I discuss one sign per episode. In this episode, I'll be discussing the peacekeeping sign of Libra. Libra is the 7th sign in the zodiac and begins on the first day of fall in the Northern Hemisphere. Libra is the only sign in the zodiac that is symbolized by an inanimate object. It's the scales. All other signs are people or animals or creatures of some kind, but Libra is the one that is different, that is this inanimate object. And the word Libra itself is Latin for balance or pair of scales, and so that's its etymological roots. It's part of why that's the symbol. And as I've discussed in previous episodes, every sign of the zodiac is also associated very directly with a specific planet or luminary. So with Libra, we find ourselves connecting to Venus. Now, Venus is one of the planets that shares its rulership, shares its relationship with another sign. So in episode 2, where I discussed Taurus, we also discussed Venus, because Venus governs both Taurus and Libra. But here we'll see another side, another expression of Venus as it relates to the Libran energy that is different than the Taurian. One of the things that makes this sign markedly different than the signs we've talked about previously is that the first 6 signs of the zodiac have much more to do with our inner experience, our inner life, our personal engagement with ourself, and not as much our relationship with the outer world, with the world around us. Aries is I am. Taurus is my values. Now that we're moving into the second half of the zodiac, we're getting into interrelationship, how we are in relation to others or to the world around us. And so that will be a growing theme as we look at the remaining 6 signs. But Libra is that tipping point. So as you've heard in previous episodes, every sign of the zodiac is associated with an element and a mode. And so with Libra, we find ourselves back in the realm of air. Now, we've discussed air previously because we've talked about Gemini in the 3rd episode. And once again, we find ourselves back in this part of the energy. We find ourselves back in the realm, the element of air. Libra is the 2nd of the air signs. We find ourselves back in the realm of air. Now, in general, air signs have to do with communication. They are more abstract than the other elements because it's not concrete like we have with earth, or there's a tangibility with water and earth. Fire that is more tactile than we have with air. We can feel air, but we can't actually grasp it. And so we see this shift as we move into air, of the abstract, of the non-concrete, the non-manifest. It is experienced but not held, not able to contain. Air signs, because of that fluidity, because the air, the wind, is always in motion. There's a multiplicity to air signs. There's a duality to air signs. There's an ability to get in between things, quite literally like the element. There's an idealistic quality to air of feeling like things can work out that we see in response to Virgo, which can be more pessimistic. There's an idealism that we have as we shift that, or we transition into Libra. Libra and air signs in general have a lot to do with connection and interconnection. Air touches everything. There's this interconnectivity that we have with air signs. And The air signs, because there's this fluidity to them, because there's this interconnection and constant movement, and in some ways almost that lack of tactileness, can have air signs sometimes come off as cold or aloof because they are staying in observation. They're sort of the fly on the wall, which can have them seem not as engaged, and so they can be sometimes misunderstood to be not feeling or not caring because they are engaged in a very different way than the other elements. Air signs also can have a tendency to be non-committal because they're observing everything. And so that elemental quality of always being in motion is reflective in that non-committal to things or people sometimes that we see in air, because there's always other possibilities, there's always ways to go. And that can sometimes be experienced or lived into as not committing to things. That is also at times interpreted to be flighty. It's not so much that air signs are untrustworthy, it's that that lack of commitment can have people not feel confident that they'll follow through because they are easily distracted, or that they'll get there on time, get somewhere on time because they are easily distracted. With the cardinal signs, which Libra is one of because it launches fall, we then with Libra, unlike with Taurus that is related to Venus, Libra in part is very different because as opposed to fixed earth, we now have cardinal air, which is very different energy. So that cardinality, that cardinal signs all launch seasons, as we've talked about in previous episodes. Aries launches spring, Cancer launches summer. Now in Libra, we have the beginning of fall. And so that initiatory energy is part and parcel to all cardinal signs. There's that starting energy, that going forward. There's a seeking energy that Libra and other cardinal signs have. It's a lot to do with beginnings because it's the beginning of fall. It's that starting energy, that reaching outward, that striving energy that we have when things are beginning can be associated with Libra. That restlessness, which in some ways works very well with that air that's always moving, that restless of wanting to get going, wanting to move forward. Within that energy, cardinal signs can be very goal-oriented, and that can be very positive, but it can also sometimes manifest with horse blinders. And so having that goal, going forward, striving, but not engaging much peripheral vision. And that can be one of the shadows of that cardinal energy, is going forward at all costs, going forward regardless of the obstacles, going forward regardless of the ramifications of one's actions. That there's just that singular perspective that cardinal signs in general have. It's a little less acute in Libra because of that elemental air quality than we see, for example, with Aries, it's fire cardinal, but there is still this singular going forward and taking action and being vulnerable to overextending or overreaching, being unrestrained in how one goes after things, and being extreme in how things show up. Now with Libra, we see that more in extremes that have polarity to them because it's that scale. So it's the flip-flopping of being very accommodating and not at all accommodating, and very inclusive and very exclusive, and ping-ponging between those two. Because even though Libra is the scales, generally speaking, although it is about balance, Libra tends to, because none of us are enlightened here, be more out of balance than balanced. And as a result, there is that ping-ponging, that swinging of the pendulum, or that seesawing back and forth between that unrestrained energy and hesitation, or that overreach and not engaging at all. It can vacillate between those extremes. So before we dive a little deeper into Libra, I thought it would be helpful to explore the planet Venus that it's associated with, because understanding the planet helps us also understand the sign. So Venus has two primary ways that she is expressed. And part of that is understood that Venus can either, depending on where she is in the sky and her orbit in relation to us on Earth, that she can appear as morning star, meaning that you see the star that is Venus very early in the morning prior to sunrise. So she's a morning star. She's rising before the sun. Conversely, she is evening star. And evening star means that the sun sets before Venus. And so we see the star at night. Now she transitions back and forth over a period of her synodic cycle between being morning star and evening star. And the ancients for a while actually thought that it was two different stars, and then they discovered this pattern of her transition from morning star to evening star and back again. As I've discussed earlier in this episode, Venus is associated with Taurus as well. It's one of the planets that we, in modern astrology, have given or see in relationship to two signs. The other being Mercury, that we discussed before, with Mercury governing both Gemini and Virgo. So Venus is the other of the planets that we still attribute to two signs. It used to be that all of the known planets, so Mercury through Saturn, governed two signs. But with the discovery of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, we have now distributed rulership to those discovered planets. But again, Venus is one of the few that still governs two signs. We get the word Friday from Venus. It's a little clearer in other languages. Viernes in Espanol, Venus's day. In English, we actually pull from the Druidic pantheon, Freya, who's the Nordic equivalent of Venus. And Freya's day is where we get the word Friday. So now turning to archetype and looking at different expressions of Venus. In myth, in folktale, we have many examples of the archetype of Venus, this goddess of love in the Roman pantheon, and Aphrodite being her Greek counterpart. Now, as I said, we get the word Friday from Freya, who is the Nordic equivalent of Venus. Ishtar comes from Babylon, Inanna in the Sumerian myths. And then we have Themis, the goddess of divine law, who was also Greek, and her Roman equivalent, Justia, which the image of Justia is the Lady Justice imagery that we see, the goddess with the blindfold holding the scales, which is very Libran in its iconography. To understand Libra more, it's helpful to understand Venus's other side of how it is expressed. We talked a lot about the beauty part of Venus that is more Taurian, and that the physical relationship with the world, that physical expression, the beauty of the natural world, the beauty of fabrics and imagery that very much ties into the Taurian expression. And with Libra, we get some of the other qualities of Venus. So we have this desire to seek harmony and balance that shows up here in this expression of Venus, this side of Venus. That Venus in relationship to Libra is about partnership and justice, Lady Justice being one of the archetypes, being one of the goddesses that we associate with this planet. There's an idealism with Libra that balance and equanimity is possible to achieve, that things can be equal. There's a quality of Venus in Libra energy, that expression of Venus as it shows up in Libra, that's also about sovereignty, of bringing things into balance, then things are whole and complete on each side. Ideally, it isn't always how it manifests. Venus is also, in its relationship to Libra, is about the peacekeeper. It's wanting that desire to bring things into harmony, bring things into balance. So we see that in relation to Venus. Now, moving more directly into the archetype of Libra and the key words that we associate with it. Libra's key phrase is I balance, as opposed to its polarity. And this is one of the other things that we're shifting into now as we get to the second half of the zodiac, is we are moving into the polarity points, the opposite signs, the signs that occur 6 months later from the ones we have previously discussed in the first 6 episodes. So with Libra, we get the counterbalance to Aries. Aries is I am, Libra is I balance. Aries is about the self, Libra is about the other. So we are shifting into a new relationship with the zodiac, moving into the second half, moving into these last 6 signs that are exploring these polarities to the first 6 episodes. And Libra's key word being I balance, right? That is the scales, that people-pleasing energy of Libra. Libra does have something to do with beauty because it is still tied to Venus. And even though we give a lot of that to Taurus, there is that piece that's Libran, but it becomes more about beauty in terms of things that are balanced. That idea that, in at least the West, they talk a lot about that people's faces who are symmetrical tend to be discussed or described as the most beautiful people. That's part of that balance, that symmetry that people's faces can have, and that being interpreted as one of the markers of beauty. That's more of where the Libran beauty shows up. Things that have that sort of balanced energy to them. Libra also in being about the other, so that has a lot to do with the relationship, itself and other. So we see Libra governing partnership, governing marriage. Libra can be the flirt, and that's part of why that shows up in that way, is wanting that attention from the other. Needing attention from another, but also being accommodating or potentially over-accommodating to the needs of others is part of what shows up with Libra. In general, Libra governs all relationships. So intimate partnerships, close friends, all of those dyadic, those one-on-one engagements. One of the things that Libra is vulnerable to is being the people pleaser, because in wanting to have things be harmonious and at least appear as equitable, appear beautiful and good, and everything's okay, that can result in being the people pleaser and creating the illusion of harmony, the illusion of balance, because you want things to be that surface level energy of air that is not that concretizing energy of that Taurian Venus, that Taurian Venusian energy, is that as long as it looks good, then it's okay. It can be a vulnerability to the Libran energy. And so part of that, Libra sometimes has a lot of masks that it can bring in. Those costumes that we're wearing, that each sign is, Libra can have that in spades because it's wanting to create the illusion that everything's okay. That's part of that aloofness, part of that lack of depth that sometimes can show up, of staying surface level, because as long as it appears good, it appears okay, it appears to be in balance, then Libra's happy. And it doesn't necessarily need it to actually be that to feel secure. There's a quality then within Libra that can be the idealist, because it's wanting everything to be okay. Depending on the degree to which one is engaging with the out of balance energy, It can genuinely want things to be fair and balanced and equitable. It's not fake in that way, but it can also be idealistic and not realistic in that the ability to genuinely foster equanimity and balance, as opposed to the reality of being able to do so. There can be an idealist and not very realistic quality to it, of just saying like, well, it looks good, so it's fine, when in reality there may be much more actual work and a depth of energy, a depth of unpacking that's required to truly create equanimity. And that's where the following sign of Scorpio would come in, because Scorpio digs deep. But again, we have this wanting things to be good, wanting everybody to be included, not wanting to exclude people, being part of that energy. Libra, again, you can show up in that sort of, that desire that everything looks good, can have a lot to do with social graces. That things look good, that behavior is proper, can be part of how that energy shows up. Now, out of balance, Libra energy, because, and that's part of this people-pleasing, part of the wanting to be the peacekeeper, but also its relationship. You merge that with the aspect of Libra that has to do with partnership, is it can result in codependency. Of feeling like, to feel okay or to have things be in balance, you need that other person, or they need you to be okay. That can be part of that Libran energy, that vulnerability to codependence, because where Aries is autonomous, Libra is all about interrelationship. And out of balance, without sovereignty within that relationship, you can tip into codependency. So in general, again, because it's the scales, right, there can be this ping-ponging back and forth with Libra, and a polarity, being extreme in that way, of balanced or out of balance, inclusive or excluding. That is part of that energy. I think part of why we see Libra show up so much around polarities, as well as it is the first sign that is a polarity point, that is an opposite sign. And so that is one of the first times this energy is really introduced, is this polarity, this opposite energy to the beginning of the zodiacal cycle, the beginning of the zodiacal year of Aries. With Libra, we get that first counterpoint, that first counterbalance. And so it can have a lot to do with polarity and projection. Not that other signs don't have that, but Libra sort of introduces that energy as the first opposite sign, as the first polarity sign. So having Libra be one of those first energy, that first time that this polarity energy is introduced, that projecting energy is introduced, the other is introduced, that Libra, similar in some ways, and so to a certain degree it's an air quality, because Gemini has this as well, is needing to make choices. Libra has this or that, that, or this. This idea of having options, it's left or right, forward or back. Libra has a lot to do with the choices that we make, and then it's unpacking what are the underlying motivations in relationship to those choices that helps us determine the best, healthiest, most advantageous direction to go. But Libra really does introduce that idea of self and other. And so there is that energy of having to choose things, as opposed to that choice is making decisions or having choices that we see in Gemini. Gemini just has lots of options. It doesn't necessarily make a decision. With Libra, there's options and you have to choose. And that's part of that different energy that is that cardinal mix with the air of that singular direction of cardinality. And so you have choices, but you can't go both directions simultaneously. Gemini would love to do that. Libra doesn't really have that potential. in the same way. It's either or. It's more binary, it's more black and white in terms of its options. And as I've discussed in previous episodes, every sign is also associated with parts of the body. And so with Libra, we move into a couple different parts of the body that are all sort of related to one another. So the kidneys are related to Libra. The lower back, which is where the kidneys fall within the body, right, is our lower back. Lower back, the kidneys, and our skin. And in general, why this is all related to Libra, why we'd put the skin and lower back and kidneys together. Well, the lower back and kidneys make more sense just because within the construct of the body, they fall in the same physical location. But that Libra in general, in that wanting to create balance, wanting to create harmony, from a physiological perspective, that's about detoxifying, creating harmony in the body. And the kidneys are part of what detoxes the body. And the skin is part of how we detox as well. And so part of that bringing things into balance is from an internal perspective, from a physiological perspective, is bringing our body into harmony, bringing the physiology of ourselves into balance, into harmony. And so that's where we see that show up with the kidneys, with the lower back. And again, the skin being our largest organ, our largest way of absorbing toxins and detoxifying. And so that's how we merge those energies, or that's why we see those to be related. So shifting into the psychosocial development aspect of Libra, which I've talked about this quality, this component of each sign in previous episodes. So again, we're moving chronologically through ages, even though it's not that when you are 3, you are in that Aries Taurian energy. It's that sign is reflective of certain ages and stages of development. So similarly, we see this with Libra. And because Libra governs relationships, we see this polarity to our late 20s, early 30s, where relationships take a different focus. The actual commitment of relationships. It's an age and stage where people are in more committed relationships, where people tend to be married or get married. Business partnerships are cultivated during these late 20s, early 30s years. Doesn't mean we don't do it later in life, but it's more of a theme for the first time during these ages of our and stages of development. We have to work with others in a new way, how we come to consensus or agreements, and how we have to cooperate with colleagues, with bosses. That becomes a growing theme during these latter parts of our 20s and early 30s. We have to cultivate diplomatic ways of communicating, having more diplomacy, and being willing to compromise in a way that with earlier stages of development, definitely not as little kids as much, but even earlier 20s or late teens, it's not as much of a theme to be diplomatic at 21 as it is at 31. Etiquette and fairness, all of those sort of Libran qualities, we see them more and more introduced into just how we interact on a day in, day out basis in these years of sort of late 20s, early 30s period of our development. It's when we're engaging with colleagues or business partners, right, and having to come to agreements, come to consensus about ideas, about business plans, about how we are going to be delegating, to give things to others. That again, that engaging with other people, who's going to take on which task, shows up during this period of our lives for sort of the first time, or in a way that it was not as much of an emphasis at earlier times in our lives. In general, there is just a maturation of our social skills that's happening during this time, of how we engage, who we engage with, what's appropriate, which is very Libran, what's the right way of interacting, how you engage with others, and finding that balance when there is somebody who's in authority, how much of your personal power do you rein in versus project? Bringing in that self and other, and that's part of that etiquette quality that can be Libran, is like, what's your role? You might not be the boss, so telling other people what to do isn't necessarily appropriate. Listening to a superior, listening to a boss, doing something that maybe you don't want to do. It isn't fun. Leo wouldn't want to do it. But moving into that Libra, and it's like, oh, but I'm part of a collective. I'm part of the other. And so for things to work, for things to be in balance, to be in harmony, I have to play my role. And so we see that show up during these years of late 20s, early 30s in a way, again, that we don't see at earlier times in life to the same degree. So shifting gears a little bit, right, as I've done in each episode, it's a lot of information to absorb. It's a lot of verbiage. It's a lot of adjectives explaining how Libra can be expressed or is manifest. Part of why I've called this Mythic Sky Storytime is that stories are how humans have made sense of the world for millennia. And looking to stories, looking at stories from different parts of the world, whether or not archetypally they are directly related to how the ancients understood the sign, because archetypes are universal, it helps us to understand the sign, understand the planet more completely by using story, because story and analogy can paint pictures for us in ways that a list of words and adjectives can't cultivate in the same way. And so this particular story for Libra has elements of different parts of that Venusian energy, but it is more of a Libran expression of Venus, as it has to do in part with marriage and partnership and equity. But there's Taurian qualities there, but I think for the purposes of helping you understand Libra, I'm going to tell you the story of Dame Ragnall, who comes from the Arthurian Legend, so King Arthur. One day, King Arthur was hunting with a friend, and with his bow and arrow, he shot a stag. He shot a deer with his bow and arrow, and the deer went running off into the woods. But not wanting the animal to suffer and wanting the venison, Arthur went into the woods to find the stag that he had gotten with his bow and arrow. But the wood was pretty thick and overgrown with bramble and various plant life. And so in order to make his way to the stag where it had fallen deep in the woods, Arthur had to remove all of his armor. He couldn't get through the overgrowth without sort of stripping himself of his armor. And so when he got to the stag, he found a man, an enemy, standing over the stag, preparing to fight. And being the diplomat, being the founder of the Round Table for discussion and inclusivity, Arthur begged this enemy of his that he encountered to spare his life, to be chivalrous. And so begging his enemy to be chivalrous, because this was the time of chivalry, Arthur negotiated with this enemy he encountered in the woods and said, look, I'm here without any armor. It's not a fair fight. You need to spare my life. Can we negotiate something here? Because it's not a fair fight. I am unarmed. And the man agreed that he wanted to uphold chivalry and fairness. And so he said to Arthur, okay, I will give you 1 year to answer a question. And if at that time you are unable to answer the question correctly, we will fight to the death. Being a little cocky, as he was known to be, said, all right, sure, whatever you want. I will find an answer to your question, and, we can fight in a year if I can't find the answer. And his enemy said, find the answer to the question, what do women want? And Arthur was like, oh, got it, no problem. He's a king. He's got a whole bunch of knights. He You can totally find the answer to this question. And so the enemy and King Arthur went their separate ways. And when Arthur got back to his kingdom, got back to Camelot, he sent his knights of the Round Table out into the world to discover the answer. And they came back with all kinds of answers. They wanted luxury, they wanted to be cared for, they wanted to marry a knight, on and on. The knights came back with different answers that were all sent off to the enemy to see if the answers they were getting were correct. And inevitably, answer after answer came back with a definitive, nope, try again, it's not it. And in short order, nearly a year had passed, and answer after answer that his knights had found that were sent to the enemy for confirmation were rejected. On the evening before the deadline, a woman arrived to Camelot, and she is described in the books as smelling like low tide, dressed in rags, buck teeth, very ragged, appearing deeply impoverished, and unkept, uncared for, unclean. And she demanded to see the king. She said, I have the answer to the question that you have been seeking, and it will spare your life. But in order to receive the answer to this question, I must marry one of your knights. And then tomorrow morning, I will tell you the answer. And many of the knights of the Round Table sort of backed into the corners of the room, afraid that Arthur would command them to marry this woman, this creature that stood before the king. Mustering his courage and his chivalry, Arthur's nephew Gawain stepped forward and said, I will marry her, uncle, to spare your life. I love you. I will do anything to protect you. And so that evening, Sir Gawain and Dame Ragnall were married. And later that evening, in their chambers, Dame Ragnall turned to Sir Gawain and asked him for a kiss. And summoning his courage, mustering his courage, he reluctantly kissed his new bride. And instantaneously, she became the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Dumbstruck, he stared at her as she began to tell him the story of how she had been under a curse, and his kiss had half released her from the spell. However, this new way of presenting this new beautiful woman who sat beside him could only appear this way half the day. And she asked him, which would you prefer? That I look like this at court during the day when we are in public, or at night in our bedchambers? Which would you prefer? And hemming and hawing and weighing his options, going back and forth, and well, on this hand, this, and yeah, the public, and how people would see me, but she's so beautiful, and then I would be with her in our bedchambers when she, back and forth, he went, hemming and hawing, weighing his options, flip-flopping back and forth between possibilities. And then, finally, he turned to her and said, I can't possibly make that choice for you. It is up to you. What would you prefer? And in that moment, Dame Ragnall was fully released from the spell. And she told Sir Gawain the answer Arthur had been seeking. She said, I am now fully released from this spell. For what women want is sovereignty, is to be self-empowered, to have their own identity, their own sense of self in the world, be able to make their own choices, which is what Gawain had granted her. And so the next morning, after Gawain and Dame Ragnall told Arthur the answer to the question he had been seeking, the enemy that they'd been sending possible answers to all year came to Camelot. And very quickly, he became tense and nervous and on edge as he looked at Dame Ragnall. And he knew that Arthur now knew the answer. For he, this enemy of Arthur's, had been the sorcerer that had cursed Dame Ragnall and had her appear to be haggard and old and unkempt and smelling like low tide. And with the response that what women want is sovereignty, the enemy left, never to be seen again. And Dame Ragnall remained beautiful always. So as you can see, there's many elements of that story that are Libran in quality. It is about marriage and partnership and equanimity. It's about choices, all of those things that I've been talking about throughout this episode, and many others that I invite you to ruminate on, and how this story relates to Libra. So switching gears again, we're going to move into the meditative part of the podcast. So as you prepare for the meditation, I recommend you find somewhere that you can sit comfortably, either cross-legged or in a chair with your feet on the floor, but somewhere that you can sit for about 20 minutes. And a chair may be preferable if you need back support, or sitting on the floor with your back against a wall. But you want to make sure that wherever you are, you're comfortable enough that any discomfort in the body that might come up while meditating isn't pulling you out of the meditation. And so we'll start this meditation as we have with the others, doing some belly breaths, connecting with the chakra system, and then moving in to a guided meditation. So with belly breaths, you want to inhale through the nose and exhale through the mouth, and we'll pause at the top and the bottom of each breath. I'll do the counting for you. So you want to inhale through the nose for the count of 4. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. And fully exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. And pause. And again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. Exhale completely through the mouth. 2, 3, 4. Pause. And again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. Exhale completely. 2, 3, 4. Hold. Last time. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale completely. 2, 3, 4. Pause. And so now returning to your normal pace, your normal rhythm of breathing. You don't need to be breathing as deeply, but still finding a gentle pace of inhaling and exhaling. And if you haven't closed your eyes, I recommend you close them now. We're going to connect with each of the chakras, the energy points that run up and down the body, to bring you into the present moment, help ground and center you before we move into the guided meditation. So on your next inhale, bring your attention to base chakra, root chakra. This is a center at the base of the spine. The chakra that helps ground us to the earth, helps keep us in the present moment. And on your next inhale, bring your attention to second chakra, sacral chakra. This is the center that governs sexuality and equanimity. It's very Libran. The balance between receptive and directive energy, our ability to receive and our ability to share. Our ability to give and our ability to take. Our sense of self, personal power, resides in this center. And on your next inhale, bring your attention to solar plexus chakra, the sun center, center of emotion, of receptivity in many ways, our ability to emanate and absorb energy, reflect the sun and project the light, how we emotionally engage with the world. And on your next inhale, you're going to bring your attention to heart chakra, heart center, literally the center of the chakra system. There's 7 chakras, and the heart chakra is the center of them. There's 3 above and 3 below. The heart chakra governs love and compassion and empathy. The heart chakra holds memories of heartache. And contains the capacity for universal love and compassion. And on your next inhale, bring your attention to throat chakra. This is the center that governs communication, our ability to speak up, how we speak, what we say, when we say, what we say. Also how we listen. How do we receive what others are saying? How do we respond to the words of others? And on your next inhale, bring your attention to your third eye. The center between the eyebrows and the forehead, center of vision and clarity, of wisdom. And on your next inhale, you want to bring your attention to crown chakra, this to the top of the head, the crown of the head. This is a center that connects us with the divine, God, goddess, universe, spirit, whatever your language is for the divine. This center, this point of light and energy, is how we connect with the divine. And connecting with the divine, you may feel tingling above the head. That's this energy connecting, opening to God, Goddess, Spirit, Universe, Source. And feeling that openness, feeling that scintillating light, this gold scintillating light coming from the divine down toward you. We're going to now bring that light through the chakra system, through the central channel, and encircling you like a cocoon of protection. And so on your next inhale, bringing that gold scintillating light from the crown down in and through the third eye, clearing out any foggy areas, any areas that are blurry, lack clarity. Let this gold scintillating light polish the edges of that blurry vision. And as you continue to bring the energy down through the central channel, down from the divine, down through the throat chakra to the heart chakra, healing areas of challenge, of pain where you did not speak up or you did not feel heard. Let this gold scintillating light heal those corners, soften those edges. And continuing to bring this light down through the central channel to the heart chakra, heart center, healing heartaches, heartbreaks, having you more willing to be more open, more trusting. And on your next inhale, bringing that gold light into solar plexus, healing areas of reaction and emotional imbalances, allowing you to connect with the power of emotion, the power of being emotionally present and engaged and honest. So you can truly connect with joy, connect with play, connect with your feelings without finding them crippling or overwhelming or reactive. And continuing to bring that gold light down into second chakra, sacral chakra. Allow this golden light to bring into balance your receptive and directive sides. The sides of you that are proactive and the sides of you that are timid, truncated, or reserved. Allow this golden light to right size those imbalances. Now bringing that energy into base chakra, root chakra, helping to ground you without creating stuckness. Grounded and present, but able to move. And so now with this golden light connecting you from the divine to the earth, Pachamama and Father Sky, connected energy moving through you, around you, encircling you like a cocoon. You are protected by the divine as we move into this guided meditation. In your mind's eye, see yourself walking through rolling hills, high grasses at midday. As you walk, the sun is high and you feel a warm breeze blowing. And without meaning to, you find yourself walking in time, your steps in rhythm with the grasses that are dancing in the wind. And as you walk, you come to the top of a small hill where you find a stone circle, sort of like a small Stonehenge, a circle of standing stones at the top of this hill. And walking into this stone circle, you find yourself transported back to ancient Greece. And standing before you is the Oracle of Delphi. This ancient priestess has met you today to answer questions you may have regarding your relationships and the ease with which you can bring different parts of your life into balance and harmony. Greeting you warmly, she stands before you with her eyes closed, deeply focused on providing you with clear and equitable responses. For her, there is no question too big or too small. She has no biases and no attachments to the answers she provides. Rather, she is here to give you the information that would be helpful to you at this time. And she remains unattached to whether you listen to her. She is simply here to be a guide. Let all your questions come up organically as they arise, and ask for clarity whenever needed. Perhaps there is an aspect of your relationship with a lover you would like to bring into greater balance, greater equanimity. Do you have sovereignty in this partnership? Do they? What suggestions does this priestess, this Oracle of Delphi, have for you today to help you accomplish bringing your relationship into greater balance? What about your work relationships? Colleagues and superiors? Even if somebody is your boss or your superior at work, there can still be balance in how you exchange ideas and communicate. Even if there is not a balance of power, there can be balance and respect. If this is lacking, see what suggestions this priestess has for you today. How can all of your relationships become more equitable for all parties involved? does she suggest to bring your analytical side into better balance, better harmony with your life's purpose? Are there areas in your life that feel unjust or unfair? What words of wisdom does she have to clarify what might actually be going on with this injustice? What suggestions does she have? What part of this lack of fairness is about your own edge of growth and maturation and soul healing and development? What is that edge for you? What might you need to work on? Do you need to be more accepting of others' human frailties? Or do you need better boundaries? Or something else entirely? What recommendations does she have to bring balance into your life regarding self-care and tending to the needs of others? Do you prioritize your own needs in the way that you should? Or do you over-prioritize those in your life? What does she recommend to bring this into harmony? And again, always ask for clarity if needed, or if other questions come to mind, ask her for her insight and wisdom. And as your conversation starts to come to its natural conclusion, see if she has any suggestions for you about how you can reconnect with her, this ancient oracle, this ancient source of information. If there are times when you are unsure of the fair and equitable choice to make, or unsure if you are making decisions from a place of balance, how does she suggest you reconnect with her wisdom? And thanking her for her insight. Ask her if there's any way she would like to be honored for all she has shared with you today. For reciprocity, particularly when we are engaging with Libran energy, is very important. What would she like in exchange for her support with you today? Imparting in whatever way feels appropriate. Turning around, you want to step out of the stone circle, back into the field with the blowing breeze. Into the setting sun. As you make your way back through the rolling hills, the dancing grasses, back into your body and back into the room. Take as much time as you need as you slowly move your fingers and toes. Opening your eyes when you feel ready. I recommend you take some time to journal on what came through. Even if you think you'll remember, it's good to write it down. Thank you so much for joining me on the 7th show of this new series, Cosmic Costumes. Please like and subscribe to Mythic Sky Storytime wherever you get your podcasts. And to learn more about me and my work, please visit mythicsky.com.